One of the things that I want to start by understanding is if you see Gore-Tex as kind of like a brand or as kind of more of like a function or a service in some ways.
I mean, Gore-Tex is a brand. I mean, obviously, the Gore-Tex membrane we're talking about here is obviously a very small component of their actual business. They make valves for heart transplants and things like that. A lot of medical things is a broader part of their actual sort of business. But what we're going to talk about, is the Gore-Tex textile, or it's not a Gore-Tex textile, it's Gore-Tex membrane applied to a textile, which creates a breathable, waterproof textile. Because the holy grail for alpine performance, for climb performance, basically anything where it's wet, is 100% breathable, 100% waterproof. This is the holy grail that every outdoor designer and every outdoor enthusiast and every outdoor pro is searching for, because this will give them the maximum performance ability in their chosen activity. To give a context of what Gore-Tex is, so when somebody presents you with a jacket and they pour a bottle of water over it and all the water runs away, that's not Gore-Tex. Might be a Gore-Tex textile, the water's running away, but that's not what Gore-Tex does. What Gore-Tex is sort of essentially kind of a sheet of slightly translucent, basically cling film. And this is laminated to the back of in principle, you can laminate this to anything. What's unique about it is it breathes. So this membrane draws heat out and moisture out away from your body, which is obviously what you're generating when you're performing an activity, but it stops water from going in, which is obviously important because you don't want to be kind of wet. The whole principle is you need to be dry.
It's interesting what you're talking about, kind of the alpine aspect, because the impression I've got is the same when I was talking to Jason about Patagonia, is like so many of these products are made for these really extreme circumstances and they're actually like really beautiful and really amazing, but you can't really actually use them because you're almost like he was like, you'd kind of melt if you tried to wear like a great big puffer in the city. And so much of this technology is now used kind of for urban living rather than kind of like, adventure or exploration. Is that something that's kind of affected how Gore-Tex is used?
As a company, obviously they're aware, and particularly depending on the markets, they're becoming much more aware of the relevance of their textile beyond the alpine, because we live in wet cities, we live in cold cities, and we need protection. A lot of the garments I'm going to talk about or kind of reference today, are by designers or brands that are kind of utilizing performance, taking that patterning knowledge, taking that construction knowledge, taking the knowledge of what the textile can deliver, and then putting it in the right place, in the right mix for even a general city use. Or, what some of the pieces I'm going to talk about today, are slightly more conceptual and focused use. So it's maybe a slightly imaginary problem, but I think that's what makes them interesting, and that's what challenges the boundaries of the textile.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that. I was going to ask if it's kind of become something, as performance wear and sportswear, it has become something that has been more looked at and more kind of like fashionable, to kind of put it deeply simply. Are you starting to see it applied to garments where perhaps it's kind of not so much about functionality anymore? It's, as you say, it is more about kind of concept or even like imagined functionality.
Obviously, if it's applied in a kind of a strange way, it might sort of almost be rendered pointless. For example, there was a point, I remember several years ago, maybe 10 years ago, there's some companies making Gore-Tex jeans. Nice from a nerdy sort of perspective, wow, cool, I've got Gore-Tex jeans. Fucking useless. Because the denim's still going to take on water, which regardless of the fact that the Gore-Tex underneath will make the jeans waterproof, you will still feel cold because the water will seep into the textile. When you get inside, you need to take them off because you would boil. Because while the textile is breathable, it's not breathable when you're sat in a room that's, probably 20 degrees. The interesting thing and the thing that I think gives Gore-Tex a premium is Gore-Tex is the only one of those producers who guarantee their products. It means they define how their products, the boundaries at which their products can be constructed, but they will guarantee any product they put their name to be waterproof. And if it fails, it's their responsibility, which means every garment is tested in a specific way by Gore-Tex, various sort of rain tests depending on the proposed purpose of the garment. A city garment won't go through the same testing as an alpine garment because the needs are defined different. Everything is seam taped, so the seam is stitched and then it's taped. Every single Gore-Tex garment needs to be constructed like this. What you will see is differences in the thickness of the tape. Some of that will be to do with the age of the garments and particularly when, and this is something particular to the Arc'teryx garments we're going to talk about. And the goal there is purely about stripping away weight. Every single tiny little piece of weight at the point of extreme need gives you better performance. The intention is not for it to be beautiful. The intention is to use the smallest amount of material because it's the smallest amount of weight. But that precision becomes, something when you're looking at it from an aesthetic perspective, really, really beautiful. And to see these garments inside out, for me, they're useless to wear them inside out because they don't work in reverse. But they look fantastic.
Tell me, I'm interested in the relationship between the brands that work with Gore-Tex and Gore-Tex. Like, is it the case that all the brands will kind of produce the garments always in-house and then send them to Gore-Tex to be tested? Or is there a bit of how does that relationship work?
The factory that's producing the garment obviously will be aware of the required standards. I think that the factory has to have a license to produce a Gore product, so they understand the processes that need to be used to make that product. And then the garment has to go to Gore-Tex to be tested. And I believe that's every single garment.
And give me an idea of kind of the range of brands that do collaborate with Gore-Tex. Because do you see it right through, I guess you must see it right through from a kind of real kind of performance sportswear sort of niche through to like high fashion even?
Yeah, it goes right through. I can't recall seeing a lot of, Prada Sport have used Gore-Tex for many years. I'm not sure if they actually currently do, but they certainly have for a long time. You would see, I think you would see kind of Gore-Tex or Windstopper in many sort of collections, particularly sort of design collections that are built with outerwear. Probably less in high fashion, again purely because there's very long lead times on these textiles. There's very strict rules on kind of construction development. So it's probably more on product focused or outerwear focused brands. Even a brand like Stone Island, a CP company, it's actually very rare they work in Gore-Tex. They don't work exclusively in it. Every so often they do produce a piece, again like the CP company piece here we're going to talk about, which was designed by Ital Fruit. They use Gore-Tex, but it's not something that's in the line, to my knowledge, all of the time, because it's not necessarily, it's an element of what they're about. It's an element of their contribution to outerwear. But then what CP company and sort of an Ital wanted and achieved basically was an earth dyed, so it's been completely constructed, which gives it this wonderful unique colour. There's high points and low points where there's obviously tension at the seams. This would never be done in the performance industry because it's sort of detrimental to the performance of the garment. It still works, but it's not necessarily the best thing for it. From an urban or from a fashion perspective, it brings a very exciting, very interesting treatment, and takes a garment to somewhere different. And then you've got kind of the CP treatment, and then you've got the Gore-Tex construction, which is kind of, has to be constructed in a certain way. The exciting thing here was, having a very conceptual pattern cutting designer like Ital, who, is just really always trying to sort of push the boundaries of how something works, how something fits, how something moves, how something transforms in this case, but then having that kind of that structure where it has to be constructed in a certain way, or for me, makes this piece very interesting.
But tell me, in the context of that piece, what you feel the Gore-Tex adds?
Well, what it adds is it makes it waterproof. The original goggle jacket wasn't waterproof. It might not have needed to be. Depends the circumstances, and I think part of the reaction to update this jacket, was to make a real sort of place. And I think by using the Gore-Tex textile here, it added an additional sort of function, along with kind of, what Ital contributed to the jacket, which was, part of that was obviously him choosing to make it from Gore-Tex because he believed in the performance attributes of that textile. But it adds a true sort of performance value, So it's like if you're sat down in this jacket in an open top car, or maybe in a more modern sense on a moped, when that water falls onto your lap, well, the Gore-Tex doesn't absorb that water; it runs it away. But then also being breathable. So you could have made the jacket out of rubber; it would have done the same thing, but it wouldn't have been breathable. It wouldn't have enhanced the user's experience, and delivered performance.
I'm interested in what you were saying about the jeans, and I wonder how much we're seeing kind of performance added almost as an accessory, where it's kind of probably the case that function will never be used, but it becomes like a relevant thing to be included.
And we like the idea of kind of things that perform at the point of extreme need. You know, we don't need them, and we might not ever push them to the level. You know, it's no different with a car, phone, a computer, you know, whatever it is. We might never really sort of push it to the point of extreme need. The percentage of user that's going to do that is very small, but the interest is that you can. You know, I do think you see a lot of kind of, you know, you definitely see it at the minute, because I think it's just sportswear in itself is having a sort of particular sort of moment in style. You know, we've moved from, particularly in men's, we've moved from kind of heritage to again kind of a concept of looking to something futuristic. And when people for me, when people look to the future, predominantly they look to kind of minimalist design, and they will often refer back to performance, because that is an industry where they're actually driving forward, because there is a point of extreme need to achieve. You know, there's a real, you know, it would be impossible for a fashion designer to sort of, you know, be driving sort of directly driving kind of performance in a fashion, from a fashion context that's going to go and then influence a performance context, because they don't have a point of extreme need to design for. The point of extreme need is walking down the street or looking good. That's why I find Gore-Tex, for my personal taste, I find it very interesting, because its performance attributes allow me to sort of get on with what they're doing, and it's sort of enhancing, and it's moving forward.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the history of the technology, because you mentioned, I found it fascinating what you were saying about even just like the taping, because Gore-Tex has been around since the 60s, hasn't it? So how much has it changed?
I'm far from a Gore-Tex historian, so the principles of textile have always been the same. Waterproof, breathable. It's just got more breathable, and it's got lighter. The way the garment's being constructed has been, you know, sort of greatly refined. Again, principles are still quite similar, but, you know, that the boundaries at which a garment could be constructed as a city context, granted the sort of the license to use it in that context, you know, and that's testament to Arc'teryx's design development, you know, and sort of really kind of driving that they believe and they understand these textiles and they place them in the right way, you know, and they believe that urban consumer needs textile. Still, all the values that were added to this new Gore Pro, which I think, again, like in a nutshell, the basis of it was that it breathes or it activates, I think, 20% faster than the previous Gore Pro, which was Pro Shell. So what that really means is that you sort of have to work up sort of 20% less body heat before it sort of starts to draw away. When I first wore that textile on a shell, I was in New York and it was horrible, pouring rain, and I wore, one of Arc'teryx's new shells, and I could genuinely notice the difference. I could genuinely notice that I wasn't getting as hot or as sort of feeling kind of as muggy as I was in previous pieces, because particularly when it is warm and you're going in and out of shops, but you're also soaking wet, garment is drawing that heat away from you and obviously keeping you dry. It's really useful. But something like Active Shell, obviously given its name, is more designed towards activity. That you might find active in kind of a trail running jacket or something like that, where the movement's different. You need something lighter, you need something that's packable, stowable, which is, again, like a trait that's often used.
And talk to me about this piece.
The Active Shell is a jacket by Acronym, which is a design company run by Elson and Michaela, and I think they've been around since the early 2000s, and between them, their sort of contribution to kind of urban utility design across their consultancy work with companies like Stone Island, with Burton, with Nike, etc. And through Acronym, which is their own design studio, which is really kind of their ideas kitchen, where they just go nuts. They just do whatever they feel is exciting, and particularly really challenging this urban idea or urban ideal, like the consumer who needs to sort of traverse through the city. Acronym isn't inspired, in my opinion, for a city guy. Again, they're taking things that are developed for other things or from other channels, sometimes not even developed for apparel, and applying them to solve sometimes almost sort of fictional problems around a kind of an urban ideal. And it is really, really exciting. This piece that I chose to kind of talk about today, is a short sleeve Gore-Tex jacket where they've then added Gore windstopper sleeve that can fix underneath. So you've got this sort of rainy protection. Again, it allows kind of a lot of their design ethos is around freedom of movement. It's ensuring you've got all of that movement, very much the same as you would in performance, but then their design sort of function or design performance is different, you know, because they're thinking about what can our man do in the city. For me, they're the kind of design that makes you sort of smile, because you're just like, how did they think of that? Why did they think of it?
Yeah, it's super interesting, kind of that idea, what you said about driving the car, but I love that you said kind of fictional. I wonder how much, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, but how much the notion of performance wear has, it's just what you said about how men like to shop, and I wonder how much performance wear has got tied in with kind of like fantasy. You know, we always talk about high fashion being about fantasy and story and narrative. It's quite interesting to think about performance wear in that context, where people like to own a garment because it makes them imagine that they can be that guy who needs to like quickly unzip his cape while he's driving.
Depending on the brand that's doing it, obviously the approach to solving a problem is sort of very different, and then the kind of the narrative that goes with that. I feel kind of what Arc'teryx Valence are doing is very quiet. They're coming from the outdoor, so they're coming from Arc'teryx. That collection is obviously, you know, under the umbrella of Arc'teryx, and you know, they're taking the kind of like the direct innovation, direct credible industrial design knowledge that comes from the company, you know, and applying it to a city context. But it's very classic in aesthetic, creates an aesthetic that's timeless rather than futuristic. Sometimes I'm looking for just somebody utilising the very best materials, and that's where I'm looking at, particularly with Arc'teryx. That's what they know, that's what they can do, you know, it's just the pinnacle textiles. They're going to be the first one to be able to use it, you know, and it's really exciting. There's a really great functional piece that I find makes your day better.
Talk to me about the last one.
So the last piece is the oldest piece by quite some distance. I mean, it's sort of way...
Tape so thick.
Yeah, exactly. You can see, I mean, I know a lot less about this jacket, because it was made well before I was around to sort of buy it. This is by a design company, a British company called Vex Generation, who they had a big thing about kind of, I think it's when the sort of criminal justice thing came in around kind of raves and whatever, like it's sort of, you know, they didn't like, you know, that idea that kind of we're basically being looked upon much more, you know, we were being observed, and it was kind of about kind of like their ethos, as I understand it, was about sort of protecting this urban customer from these things. The translucent elements on the sides of the hood were there for if you were riding a bike, so you could see, so your peripheral vision wasn't affected by obviously having the hood up, which, you know, in the same principle, if you were walking down an alley with your hood up, if you can see outside, you're less likely to get jumped from behind. You know, from my sort of reading of them and kind of, you know, they had these beautiful shots, things, but it was very much about, you know, it was quite aggressive, because I think it was a reaction to the time. You know, this is arguably one of the most futuristic looking piece here, and it's the oldest.
It's interesting what you were saying about that kind of like some of the subtleties to how they nod to different kind of like social things that were going on, but even just like the name Vex Generation, I'm always interested, I think, in the kind of whether sportswear is kind of political in any way, and I'm interested in even, as you say, putting the focus on function aside, the kind of the way it deals with and looks at masculinity and aggression is always quite interesting, I think. You know,
I don't think they're necessarily always sort of aggressive. There are certain themes vexed, and I suppose an element of acronym as well. There is kind of a slightly more activist aesthetic, you know, like you're very much like an outsider, like outside of society. You're not reacting to what's going on in the world, you're reacting to what's going on in sport. You're just trying to push the boundaries of an activity. Whereas when a sort of a designer with the take of the city or take of the urban or take of the style, they're trying to react to something because they don't have a performance to react. There's no point of extreme need. So sometimes the point of extreme need might be like conveying a message or supplying a customer with the tools to deliver a message by the way they want to dress or the way they want to sort of equip themselves to make a certain statement.
Tell me about the last jacket.
So, I mean, you know, we spoke a little bit about the Arc'teryx Valence jacket. That's the different piece, because for me, it's quite an honest answer to a city need with Gore Pro textile, which gives you sort of the highest performance textile, you know, and then you're just looking, you know, very well considered pocket placement, you know, utilising all of the knowledge of putting things in the right place and making it kind of about allowing the user to define the garments. So it's about ensuring that you give the customer and you give the kind of the right pockets in the right place. That principle applies to every piece we talk about. It's just illustrating an extremely specific idea, mix of materials and the sort of fit and function, you know, even down to how the bag, the jacket and its pieces pack into, then interacts with the garment. These kind of garments go to, it's just a different set of sensibilities. It's kind of, you know, like but I feel like it's the same sensibilities in a way that might drive somebody else to consume high fashion. You know, I see these design contributions on the same level as anything anyone in high fashion is doing. If anything, there's potentially more design integrity in them because they took much longer to design. You know, this jacket's a season's work. Real sort of design innovation and design, you know, like investment in design, and then that's what it's being sold on as well. That's the message that's coming over to the consumer, which I think is interesting.